The history of maritime trade has always been marked by the evolution of ship sizes. From ancient Greek galleys to modern container ships, humans have strived to make transport larger and more efficient. But with this growth, one might ask, is it possible to build a ship too big? The answer is yes, it is. The largest ship in the world with the wildest history, records, scandals, death and rebirth, and a passion for changing names. Today on the horizon is Seawise Giant, aka Oppama, aka Happy Giant, aka Jahre Viking, aka Nevis, aka Mont.
In that time, I have had many names.
The history of this ship began with the oil crisis in the 1970s, when following the Yom Kippur War, Arab countries restricted oil exports. This led to a quadrupling of fuel prices and a massive restructuring of the global economy. This restructuring also affected logistics. Firstly, the endless wars in the Middle East made the Suez Canal less reliable for transportation, and ships, especially tankers, often had to bypass Africa. This was certainly not ideal, but it did remove restrictions on their sizes. Secondly, under the new conditions, it turned out that the more oil a single tanker could carry, the more profitable transportation became. This sparked another race of giants, with several countries simultaneously building ships much larger than the world had ever seen before. A new class of ultra-large crude carriers, ULCCs, emerged. One of them, in 1974, was laid down in Japan at the Oppama shipyard of Sumitomo Heavy Industries Corporation. The tanker was built under contract with a certain Greek client, rarely mentioned, although it was most likely the shipping magnate Stavros Niarchos, who owned a vast transport fleet at the time. By 1975, a 419,000-ton monster had already been built. Just to put the numbers into perspective, the American nuclear-powered aircraft carrier Nimitz, built around the same time, was 4 times lighter. But this gigantism presented problems. The Japanese built a single-hull tanker and equipped it with a single enormous propeller, over 9 meters in diameter and weighing 50 tons. Behind the propeller they placed a rudder weighing 230 tons, roughly the same as a fully loaded Airbus A330. The design was simple: fewer mechanisms, easier maintenance, more efficient hydrodynamics. Given the ship's unlimited draft, it was an obvious solution. However, they miscalculated slightly with the structure. The enormous propeller in certain modes created parasite vibrations on the hull, and when in reverse, the ship began to shake noticeably. The structure had to be redesigned. The customer was dissatisfied, so much so that instead of a pompous acceptance ceremony for the Giant, the world witnessed a scandal, contract termination, and lawsuits. Ironically, the tanker didn't even have a name throughout this time. During construction, it was simply called 1016, based on its hull number. At the acceptance ceremony, it was to be called Portos, but after the contract was terminated, this name was abandoned, changing it to Oppama, in honor of the shipyard where it was built. But with exclusive super cool machines, the usual practice applies. If one rich guy doesn't want to buy it, another rich guy will. That person was Tung Chao Yung, owner of the Hong Kong-based shipping company Orient Overseas. The shipbuilders were preparing to carry out a local upgrade for the tanker and strengthen the structure to eliminate vibrations. But the new customer wanted more. The thing is, while the Japanese were struggling with their Giant, the French had already built the supertanker Batius, which had a displacement of around 660,000 tons, even heavier. Overtaking their competitor, the Japanese decided to carry out a procedure called jumboization. The giant ship was to become even more giant. The work turned out to be less difficult than it seemed. Most of the ship was composed of identical sections, so to enlarge it, it was necessary to divide it and add more. So after a couple of years of refurbishing, the updated tanker was launched. Tung Chao Yung was better known in the business by his initials, C.Y. Tung, and he named the ship to sound similar to his initials, Seawise Giant. Be prepared, our hero is sort of a Sea Sauron, and he'll change names more than once. So, the Seawise Giant has once again reclaimed its status as the largest vehicle ever built. Its length is 458.5 meters, a record. If it stood up high, it would be 150 meters higher than the Eiffel Tower. Its height, from keel to main deck, is 29.8 meters. That's a 9-story building, not including the superstructure. Its width is 68.6 meters. You could dock 2 Titanics on it with room to spare. Its deck was the size of 4 football fields, and the crew rode bicycles. Interestingly, the ship the size of a skyscraper was operated by a crew of only 30 to 40 people. Its full displacement was a whopping 646,000 tons. Yes, it remained slightly lighter than Betty Hughes, but it was longer, and its dead weight, cargo capacity, reached a record 565,000 tons of crude oil, about 4.1 million barrels, enough to provide the United States for a whole 5 hours. Given its weight and dimensions, the tanker's surprisingly weak power plant seems a bit odd. A single propeller was driven by a 50,000 horsepower steam turbine fed by 2 boilers. For comparison, the Nimitz aircraft carrier's propulsion system is 5 times more powerful, given its owner's speed of almost 32 knots, double the Seawise Giant's modest 16.5 knots. But here, firstly, hydrodynamics plays a role. The tanker's design creates considerable drag, and even a significant increase in power would hardly have resulted in a significant increase in speed. Secondly, economics. Increased power increases fuel consumption, often unjustifiably. A tanker is not an ambulance, it needs to go steady, not fast. Besides, if you're holding as much oil as 2 or 3 conventional tankers, there's no need to rush. There were also other nuances. Due to its enormous size, the Seawise Giant was, shall we say, not very flexible. It had to choose longer routes, it was a bit complex to operate, and the arrival of this monster was akin to a Boeing 747 landing at a provincial airport. Given its weight, it was incredibly inert. Slowing down from cruising speed to a complete stop, the ship could travel a whopping 5 to 6 miles. Even loading and unloading oil into it was often handled not by port infrastructure, but by other tankers. The Giant was so enormous that it simply couldn't approach the shore. Heck, remember I said that the largest supertankers couldn't pass through the Panama and Suez Canals? Well, for this monster, the English Channel was too small. With a draft of 24.6 meters, it risked running aground even there. Nevertheless, it performed quite well, transporting impressive volumes across the seas and oceans, connecting buyers from all over the world with suppliers, primarily from the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and of course the Middle East. But then another war caught up with it. In the 1980s, the Iran-Iraq War raged in the region, and ships in the Persian Gulf frequently came under attack. In 1988, a group of Iraqi fighter jets flew into the Strait of Hormuz and fired on tankers anchored there, one of which was the Seawise Giant. The ship was struck by an Exocet missile, which caused an explosion and a massive fire. In the chaos of the attack and the destruction of several tankers around it, neither the crew nor the smaller vessels that arrived to help were able to contain the fire. But the world never witnessed a Titanic-style tragedy. The ship didn't really sink. The Seawise Giant was pushed into shallow water, and due to its enormous draft, it sat on the seabed without ever sinking. After inspection, however, it was still considered lost. Repairing this post-apocalyptic relic seemed pointless. However, this time too, there were some brave souls. After the war, the tanker was purchased by the Norwegian company Norman International. The ship was towed to Singapore when they managed to completely repair it. Naturally, the name was changed once again to Happy Giant, and in 1991 it was returned to service. Soon after, the tanker was purchased by the Norwegian ship owner Jørgen Jahre, who, per tradition, named it after himself, Jahre Viking. However, the ship's demanding nature had already become a problem, and coupled with the decline in oil prices in the 1990s, shipping operations were getting unprofitable. Furthermore, after several oil spills involving tankers, strict restrictions were introduced on the operation of single-hold tankers, in favor of safer double-hold ones. Jahre Viking was single-hold, so its career was clearly coming to an end. In 2004, it was purchased by First Olsen Tankers, and yes, renamed again to Nevis. However, the tanker no longer transported oil. Its new owners anchored it off the coast of Qatar and used it as a floating storage and offloading vessel. Several years later, the Giant received its final name, Mont. It was transported to India and scrapped there in 2010. All that remains of the world's largest ship is a 36-ton anchor, now on display at the Hong Kong Maritime Museum. These days, the ship-size race has slowed, and such gigantic tankers are no longer built, with efforts to maintain a balance between cargo capacity and operational flexibility. Safety requirements have also become more stringent. Everyone understands that the sinking of a ship carrying 4 million barrels of oil is an environmental disaster of biblical proportions. Technically, one could say that larger vessels exist today, like the Pioneering Spirit, which weighs over 1 million tons. But these are not quite classic ships and belong to their own class of special floating objects. Thus, the Seawise Giant in many ways remains the ultimate vessel, a symbol of the oil age, having earned its place in the history of seafaring. Subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with new stories. There are still a lot of interesting things on the horizon.